5th of October, 16th Sunday of Trinity. Sermon on 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 to 14, Psalm 137, and Lamentations 3, verses 19 to 26. When the nation of Judah, God's own people, found themselves enduring a long exile in Babylon, far from their homeland and in a totally alien culture, they were in despair. These people who had failed in their worship, turned to idolatry, neglected their God-given law, and who had disregarded the warnings of the prophets sent by the Lord, had been deported. As the years went by, some died, others were born, and life in their promised land, though only a distant memory, began to be something they craved. In Psalm 137 we can read of their longing for home, to be able to sing once more the song of the Lord on their own soil. Jerusalem, their capital city, with its glorious temple built by King Solomon, lay in ruins, but the memory of it was now their highest joy. They had lost hope, however. All they could envisage was that one day an enemy would come to Babylon and inflict on Babylonian infants the cruelty that had once been perpetrated against their own offspring. Fortunately, what lay ahead was something far better. An enemy, King Cyrus of Persia, did indeed come. He defeated the Babylonians, and he decreed that the people of Judah could return to their home. Many decades earlier, the prophets Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah had warned the people of Judah, but they'd also offered comfort and promises of future restoration. Jeremiah had lived through the attack by the Babylonians and had subsequently written of his grief in the book of Lamentations. It's a record of his mourning over Jerusalem, its empty streets, derelict temple, the sinfulness and the resulting suffering of its people. But in the midst of his grieving, Jeremiah wrote of the Lord's steadfastness to the people he had chosen to bring forth the Messiah. Even while he recalled his affliction and wandering, the bitterness and the gall, he wrote this: "Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love we're not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." God keeps his promises, and to wait quietly for his salvation is good advice in any age. When the Apostle Paul wrote his second letter to Timothy, he needed to keep that injunction in mind. He was in prison for the second time. His first imprisonment had been house arrest, and he'd been allowed a degree of comfort and freedom. This time, however, he was in an underground dungeon, cold, deserted by many of his companions, and he knew he would never be released. He concluded this letter begging Timothy to get to him before winter and bring his warm cloak and some reading material. He sounds desperate, but although Paul was craving some creature comfort and something to engage his mind, as anyone might do in prison, he had by no means lost his faith. In our passage today, at the beginning of the letter, he's full of spiritual advice for Timothy, who, although a young man, was a leader of a church in Ephesus. Paul encouraged Timothy to fan into flame the gifts that God had bestowed on him, so that he would have a spirit of power and self-discipline. He told him not to be ashamed to testify concerning Jesus, and to join him in suffering for the gospel. He emphasized that salvation is by grace, not because of anything we have done, and it has been in God's mind before the beginning of time, revealed by Jesus Christ, who, by defeating death, brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. Paul knew that it was his zeal in preaching the gospel that had landed him in jail. but he had no regrets and no fears. He then made such a strong statement of faith that it has rung through the ages ever since. I know whom I have believed, and am convinced that he is able to guard that which I have committed unto him against that day. Paul knew his salvation was coming, either when he was called home or when Christ returned. He was always looking and waiting for the day of the Lord, but he was content to leave times and seasons in the Lord's hands. He knew that either way the Lord would bring him safely to his heavenly kingdom. That is the same faith and hope that Jeremiah felt when he trusted the Lord and claimed, "It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." It's remarkable that the lamentations of Jeremiah, written in such a time of crisis and grief, have given rise to two of our best known and uplifting hymns, "New every morning is the love," and "Great is thy faithfulness." And those words of Paul, written in prison, have given rise to the hymn, "I know whom I have believed." And so good things do come out of crises. The same faith and hope is to be our own bulwark during the days in which we are living, facing not exile or imminent death, as did Jeremiah and Paul respectively, but with equally serious challenges. There is the general apathy regarding faith, with even many churches compromising on Christian doctrines. There's the constant presence of war and all the attendant suffering it brings. There's global poverty, the migration of whole populations as their homelands become uninhabitable through climate change or civil unrest. There's global poverty, the migration of whole populations as their homelands become uninhabitable through climate change or civil unrest, and the reminders of serious pollutions, with even our own bodies invaded by plastic particles and forever chemicals. We're helpless in the face of much of this. We do, however, have the same promises that sustained the faith of Jeremiah and Paul, the promise that the Lord's compassions never fail. They are new every morning, and the assurance that God will bring us safely to his heavenly kingdom, so we can wait quietly for his salvation. Waiting quietly, however, does not mean doing nothing and saying nothing. No one could accuse Jeremiah or Paul of keeping quiet or inactive. Paul's own words to Timothy give us an idea of what we should be doing. Fan into flame the gift God has given to each of us. At the very least, that gift is our faith. Once I was talking to some Jehovah's Witnesses and listening to their cautious and limited understanding of God's grace, and I said to them, if faith is a car, yours is still in the garage while you read the instruction manual. I'm tearing down the motorway in mine. Last week, from a passage in 1 Timothy, we heard Paul say, work out your salvation in fear and trembling. In other words, do something with it, let it show, make it loud. Paul even invited Timothy to join him in his suffering, not to be cautious, not to be ashamed to testify to his faith. We're probably all more reticent to share our faith than we should be. Let's remember how precious it is and how much others need it. Jeremiah and Paul lived through difficult times and maintained their hope, their faith and their determination. We can follow in their footsteps whatever life throws at us, and so prove that the Lord can protect what we have entrusted to him until the day we are called home or he returns.